A quiet city park. An elderly man sits on a bench feeding birds when a sudden shout slices the calm. A police K9 unit rushes in. Release the dog. An officer orders. The German Shepherd lunges. Straight toward the old man. Bystanders gasp. Phones rise to record. Why would police set a trained K9 on a harmless senior? Then what unfolds next shocks everyone and melts every heart. A soft breeze drifted through the city park, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming jasmine. Morning sunlight filtered through tall oaks, sprinkling golden patterns across the quiet walking paths. An elderly man sat on his favorite green bench near the pond, a worn cap shading his silver hair. Every day he came here with the same calm routine: a slow walk, a pocket full of breadcrumbs for the birds, and a quiet hour to watch the world wake. Today felt no different. At first, pigeons fluttered eagerly at his feet while ducks glided across the shimmering water. He smiled, tossing small handfuls of crumbs, listening to the soft coos and gentle splashes. Nearby, joggers passed with rhythmic steps and parents pushed strollers along the paved trail. The air carried an easy peace, the kind that made time feel unhurried. For a long while, nothing disturbed the morning's harmony. Then faintly a sound broke the spell. A distant wail of sirens threaded through the birdsong. The man paused, head tilted, wondering if it was just traffic beyond the trees. But the noise grew clearer, sharper, multiple sirens drawing closer with startling speed. Birds scattered from the pond, startled by the sudden rising pitch. Across the lawn, people turned toward the sound. Runners slowed. Parents paused mid-step. Conversation stilled. A nervous ripple passed through the crowd as the sirens cut abruptly, replaced by the low growl of engines pulling to a stop. The old man's heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. Something unusual was happening, and it was headed straight for this peaceful corner of the park. He tightened his grip on the bread bag, eyes narrowing at the distant flash of blue lights between the trees. The gentle morning was about to change. The calm of the park shattered as 3 patrol cars swung into view, tires crunching over the gravel path. Their sudden appearance was almost theatrical. Doors flung open in unison, radios crackling sharp commands. Red and blue lights strobed against the greenery, painting the oaks and benches in a frantic kaleidoscope of color. What had been a lazy morning now pulsed with urgency. Officers spilled out quickly, moving with tight, deliberate coordination. 2 of them headed straight toward the playground, scanning every face. Another pair circled wide around the pond, eyes alert beneath their caps. The lead officer, a tall figure with a square jaw and a commanding voice, gestured for everyone to stay back. His words carried the unmistakable tone of a serious situation, though no one yet understood what it was. Parents instinctively drew their children closer. Runners stepped aside, breathing hard as they watched the sudden choreography of uniforms. Someone near the benches whispered, "Is there a fugitive?" Another answered with a nervous shrug. The old man on the bench remained still, the bread bag resting on his lap, as if trying to puzzle out whether this was mere routine or something far graver. Then came a sharp, metallic sound, the release of a K9 transport latch. From one of the cruisers leapt a powerful German Shepherd, its coat gleaming under the morning sun. The dog landed with a low thud, muscles taut and ears pinned forward. A handler gripped the leash, issuing clipped commands the animal obeyed instantly, nose testing the air with quick, purposeful sniffs. The crowd collectively held its breath. Nothing in the peaceful park explained such urgency. No smoke, no shouting victim, no visible threat. And yet every movement of the officers suggested they were closing in on something dangerous and immediate. The old man adjusted his cap and leaned ever so slightly forward. The sirens were gone now, but in their absence came a different kind of tension, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against every tree and stone. Whatever had brought the police here was unfolding right before his bench, and he sensed that his quiet morning was only the beginning of a much stranger encounter. The stillness broke with a single, cutting order. "Release the dog." The command rang through the park like a crack of thunder. Every conversation, every cautious shuffle of feet froze in its wake. The German Shepherd, muscles bunched like springs, jerked forward on the leash, teeth bared in a flash of white. His handler unclipped the heavy clasp with one swift motion. In an instant, the dog surged ahead. Gravel scattered under his paws as he lunged with a speed that seemed impossible, a living arrow of black and tan. Children screamed and ducked behind their parents. A jogger dropped her water bottle with a metallic clatter. The sudden violence of the scene felt unreal, like a frame ripped from an action film and dropped into the tranquil park. The old man on the bench startled but did not run. His hand tightened on the wooden armrest, knuckles whitening, yet his eyes stayed remarkably steady. A soft wind lifted the brim of his cap as he watched the animal charge straight toward him. Around him, strangers shouted warnings. "Move! Get out of the way!" But he remained rooted as if something deeper than fear held him in place. Officers closed in behind the dog, their boots pounding the grass. One raised a hand, signaling others to spread out, forming a wide semicircle around the bench. The radios on their shoulders spat bursts of static and quick, urgent words no bystander could decipher. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the crowd. "Why him?" someone whispered. "What did that old man do?" another asked, voice trembling. No one had an answer. The dog's focus never wavered. Eyes locked on the old man, he powered forward. The powerful sound of his breathing loud enough to carry across the stunned silence. Just as the shepherd reached striking distance, time seemed to stretch, every heartbeat amplified. The old man slowly rose to his feet, posture calm, as the living missile closed the final yards. The park held its collective breath, waiting for the collision that seemed inevitable. Whatever this was, it was no random stop. Something about this quiet stranger had triggered the most dramatic command a K9 team can give, an order to attack. The German shepherd skidded to a sudden halt, a breath away from the old man. Dust rose in a small cloud around his paws, but he didn't leap or snap. Instead, he stood rigid, tail stiff, ears pitched forward like twin radar dishes. The command to attack had been clear, yet he froze, muscles trembling with pent-up energy. The old man's eyes narrowed with quiet curiosity. Slowly, he shifted the crumpled bread bag from one hand to the other and straightened his back. His movements were unhurried, almost deliberate, as though he sensed panic would only feed the tension. The cap's brim shadowed his face, but a faint crease of concern crossed his weathered features. Around them, a tense ring formed. Officers spread wider, boots crunching over the gravel path. Hands hovered near holsters. Radios hissed with clipped updates. Still no one lunged forward. The scene teetered between action and stillness, a taut string that might snap at any second. The dog began to circle the bench in quick, precise arcs, nose working furiously. He brushed against the old man's legs, then darted back, studying him with sharp, intelligent eyes. Every pass ended with the same locked gaze, as if he were searching for something hidden beneath the man's calm exterior. A child whimpered from the crowd. Someone whispered, "He must be armed." But the old man showed no sign of threat. No sudden moves, no startled flinch, only a steady watchfulness that hinted at quiet resolve. For the officers, the puzzle deepened. Their canine partner never ignored an attack order, yet here he was, focused but strangely restrained. It was as if the dog recognized something invisible to everyone else, something that held him back even as adrenaline urged him forward. The question hung heavy in the charged morning air. Why this man? And what secret did the K9 sense that no human eye could see? The old man drew a steady breath, the kind that quiets a racing heart. He adjusted his cap and slowly opened his empty hand, palm facing the dog. "Easy now," he said in a voice soft enough to be mistaken for a breeze. The words carried no fear, only quiet authority, like someone used to calming restless animals. Duke, the German shepherd, lowered his head slightly, ears twitching. His paws shifted on the gravel, claws scraping in short bursts. He didn't retreat, but he didn't strike either. Instead, he sniffed the air, inching forward until his nose hovered inches from the man's open palm. A low whine slipped from his throat, the sound of tension mixed with recognition. Behind them, officers tightened their formation. The lead handler raised his arm, prepared to give a second command. But something in the scene, a stillness that felt deliberate, made him hesitate. The dog wasn't defying orders, he was thinking. The old man spoke again, the same calm tone wrapping around each word. "That's it, boy. You're all right. Nothing to fear." He kept his movements slow and predictable, his eyes never leaving Duke's. Every gesture said, "I understand you. I mean no harm." Spectators clutched phones and held their breath. A woman near the front whispered, "Why isn't he scared?" Another answered, "Maybe he knows something we don't." Their voices barely carried. The silence was thick enough to swallow sound. Duke inched closer and gave a gentle nudge to the man's knee. The old man didn't flinch. Instead, he allowed the dog to press against his leg like greeting an old friend. For a fleeting moment, it looked less like a standoff and more like a reunion. The lead officer's jaw tightened. Protocol urged decisive action, yet his instincts told him to wait. Something was unfolding that no training manual covered. The old man's poise wasn't defiance, it was connection. And whatever that connection meant, it was powerful enough to halt a trained K9 in mid-command, leaving everyone watching to wonder what history lay hidden beneath that quiet exchange. A ripple of uneasy whispers spread through the gathering crowd. Mothers drew their children closer, clutching small shoulders as they peered over the low park fence. Joggers who had stopped mid-stride wiped sweat from their brows, exchanging quick, bewildered looks. Phones hovered in trembling hands, recording every second of the strange standoff. "He must be dangerous," someone murmured near the swings. "Why else would they send the dog?" A man beside her shook his head, eyes fixed on the calm figure at the center. "But look at him, he's not even flinching. Something's different here." Another bystander, a teenager with a skateboard under his arm, spoke in a half-whisper. "Maybe he's hiding something. A weapon or, I don't know, drugs?" His friend frowned. "Old guys don't usually run cartels, man." They both fell silent, staring as Duke paced in tight circles around the bench. The old man remained a statue of composure. Even with dozens of eyes drilling into him, he neither spoke nor gestured wildly. His stillness deepened the mystery, making each second feel longer than the last. A woman in a sun hat gasped as the German shepherd paused and pressed his nose to the man's sleeve again. "Is he smelling explosives?" she whispered half to herself. The word explosives carried like a spark, igniting nervous glances throughout the crowd. Parents instinctively stepped back, creating a cautious ring of distance. Through it all, the old man's calm seemed almost otherworldly. He looked not cornered, but present, as though he belonged in this precise moment for reasons no one could yet grasp. The dog's every movement added to the tension, and the spectators' murmurs swelled into a low hum of theories and guesses. Whatever truth lay beneath this quiet confrontation, everyone could feel it. Something more than an ordinary police stop was unfolding before their eyes. Duke's pacing grew tighter, a deliberate spiral that never strayed far from the old man's feet. Each turn was sharp and measured, nose close to the ground, nostrils flaring with every breath. He paused, lifted his head and sniffed the air as if something invisible floated just out of reach. Then he let out a low, puzzled whine, a sound no one expected from a dog trained to attack. The handler's brow furrowed. "Duke, bite," he commanded, voice crisp and commanding. But the shepherd didn't leap. Instead, he tilted his head, ears flicking back for a heartbeat before locking forward again. His eyes stayed fixed on the man's face, dark pools of alertness that seemed almost searching. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Why isn't he obeying?" someone asked. A young mother clutched her child tighter, eyes wide. The officers exchanged quick glances, the tension of broken protocol hanging heavy between them. A police K9 ignoring a direct bite order was almost unheard of. Duke took another slow circuit around the bench. This time he stopped behind the old man and nudged gently at the man's calf with his nose, then stepped back, tail giving a subtle, conflicted flick. He sniffed again, deeper, longer, as though the air itself held a secret. The handler tried once more, louder this time. "Duke, take hold, nothing." The shepherd's only answer was a low rumble of sound, not a growl of threat, but a strange, throaty moan of unease. He glanced once toward his handler, then back to the old man, as if pleading silently for them all to understand something he could not explain. The old man remained perfectly still, his breathing even, eyes never leaving the animal's face. There was no fear in his posture, only quiet acknowledgement, as if he sensed the dog's inner struggle and chose patience over panic. Minutes stretched like hours. The murmurs of the crowd softened to a hush. Even the radios seemed to hold their static. Everyone could see it now. Duke was not simply refusing. He was deciding. Something about the old man was disarming every instinct drilled into the K9 through years of relentless training. In that strange stillness, a question grew heavier than any command. What did this dog know that no human eye or ear could yet grasp? A light breeze stirred the park again, lifting the brim of the old man's cap just enough to reveal a faint faded tattoo on his forearm. Sunlight caught the dark ink, a pattern of letters and numbers blurred by time. For a moment it looked like a simple relic of youth, the kind many carried from long ago days. But to a trained eye it spoke of something far deeper. One of the officers squinted, recognition sparking across his face. The symbols weren't random. They matched the insignia used decades ago by an elite military K9 unit, a program whispered about in police circles for its legendary handlers. The old man shifted slightly and more of the mark came into view. A pair of wings and the outline of a shepherd's head. Duke stopped pacing and stared at the exposed arm. His ears flicked and a low, almost mournful whine escaped him. He stepped closer, lowering his head until his nose hovered over the tattoo. The dog sniffed once, twice, then pressed his muzzle gently against the inked skin, as if recognizing a forgotten scent buried beneath years of ordinary life. The handler's breath caught. Memories of training seminars and old case studies rushed back, stories of handlers whose unique scents and whistle calls were imprinted on K9 bloodlines for generations. Dogs from those lines sometimes reacted to those cues even decades later, as if loyalty could travel through memory itself. The old man finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Easy, boy," he murmured almost to himself. "You've got their nose, don't you? Just like the others." His words weren't for the crowd. They were for Duke alone, carrying a tone of gentle familiarity that resonated like a long-forgotten command. The circle of officers hesitated. They were trained to read subtle signals, and this one was impossible to miss. Something about this stranger, his history, his scent, the invisible thread of old service, had cut straight through layers of conditioning and protocol. Whispers flickered across the crowd. Military? Was he a soldier? The question hung in the air like smoke. What had first seemed like a harmless retiree now felt layered with quiet heroism. Duke gave a final soft whine and rested his head lightly against the man's knee, the ultimate sign of recognition. Whatever past lay hidden in that faded tattoo, the dog had unearthed it without a single word. The lead handler's pulse quickened as he studied the man's forearm. The faint tattoo, the calm authority in the stranger's voice, each detail aligned with stories he had heard during specialized K9 training. There had been brief mentions in dusty manuals and late-night conversations among senior trainers, a handful of handlers from decades past whose skills and bond with their dogs became near legend. Some were said to leave imprints so deep that future generations of service dogs reacted to their scent or subtle cues, even without direct training. Could this quiet old man be one of them? The possibility tightened the officer's chest. He recalled a name, a decorated war dog handler who had vanished into civilian life after years of covert missions. The records were sketchy, many classified, but the fragments matched: the rare tattoo, the air of unshakable calm, the uncanny ease with which he read Duke's body language. Behind him, another officer whispered, "What's happening? Why isn't Duke biting?" The handler didn't answer. He kept his gaze locked on the old man. Memories of those whispered legends threading through his mind. What if this wasn't defiance at all? What if Duke was recognizing a living link to his own bloodline's earliest hero? He tightened his grip on the leash but did not reclip it. Instead of issuing another order, he slowly lowered his free hand, signaling the others to hold position. The officers around him hesitated, exchanging questioning looks, but the silent command to wait was unmistakable. The handler swallowed hard, wrestling between duty and an instinct that felt just as strong. Protocol demanded decisive action. But another voice, a quieter, deeper knowing, told him something extraordinary was unfolding. For reasons science might never explain, a dog and a man were connecting across time. With a steady breath, the officer made his choice. He gave no further order to attack. In that charged stillness, he chose trust over force, allowing the mystery between the old man and the K9 to reveal itself on its own terms. The park seemed to hold its breath as Duke inched closer. The dog's deep brown eyes softened, the hard edge of attack giving way to something far older and gentler. With a slow, almost reverent motion, he pressed his head against the old man's chest. The contact was firm, deliberate, less a restraining move than an embrace. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Parents who had clutched their children now lowered their arms in stunned silence. Phones still recorded, but no one spoke. The moment felt fragile, as if a single loud word might break whatever delicate bridge had formed between man and dog. The old man lowered his hand, resting it lightly on Duke's broad back. "Good boy," he murmured, the words trembling with a warmth that hinted at long-buried memories. "You found me." His voice cracked just enough to betray a swell of emotion. Duke closed his eyes briefly, leaning harder into the man's chest. A low, contented rumble vibrated through his body. Not the growl of a trained attack, but the sound of recognition, almost like a sigh of relief. The handler watched, jaw tight, his earlier urgency softening into awe. The man's lips moved again, quieter this time, forming a name that few caught. "Shadow," he whispered. The syllables drifted in the breeze, puzzling those close enough to hear, but Duke's ears twitched at the sound. He tilted his head upward as though he understood. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "Shadow was your great-grandfather," he said more audibly now, voice steadier. "I trained him. Years ago. Saved lives together, brave as you." He stroked the dog's neck with a gentle hand, each movement a silent conversation only they seemed to share. The handler blinked hard, realizing the enormity of what he was witnessing. The genetic imprint of a hero dog, reaching across generations, had drawn Duke here. Not aggression, but memory coded in scent and instinct. Around them, the crowd began to shift from fear to quiet wonder. Strangers wiped their eyes. The tension that had gripped the park all morning melted into a profound stillness, as if everyone sensed they were standing inside a story that would be retold for years to come. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves overhead and Duke's slow, measured breathing against the old man's chest. Then, with a steadiness that carried decades of memory, the man finally raised his gaze to the circle of officers and onlookers. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said quietly, voice carrying farther than expected in the hushed park. "Once, long ago, I was Sergeant Hale, U.S. Army K-9 Corps." The words hung in the air, weighty and unexpected. A few people gasped. Others simply stared, trying to reconcile the gentle retiree with the soldier he had just revealed. He glanced down at Duke, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "During the war, I trained a dog named Shadow. He saved more lives than I ever could count. Brave, loyal, a partner in every sense. When our unit disbanded, I swore I'd never forget him. I never have." His voice faltered, then steadied. "What I didn't know is that his bloodline lived on." The handler blinked, memories of specialized training flickering through his mind, lessons about selective breeding programs that preserved the traits of exceptional K-9 heroes. Dogs like Duke were direct descendants of legendary war animals, chosen for courage, intelligence, and an unbreakable bond with humanity. It wasn't fantasy. It was carefully preserved history. Thomas continued, his eyes misting. "They say a dog never forgets a scent. Maybe it's true for their descendants, too." Duke must have caught something that carried from Shadow to me, even after all these years. He stroked Duke's neck with gentle reverence. He knew I was family before any of us did. A deep silence settled over the park. The crowd that had once bristled with fear now stood in quiet awe. The lead officer lowered his radio, the weight of protocol giving way to respect. Parents who had shielded their children now allowed them to step forward, curiosity softening their earlier alarm. Duke lifted his head and gave a short, soft bark, as if to confirm every word. The sound was not a warning but a declaration, one that echoed like a bridge between past and present. The handler finally exhaled, his earlier tension melting into something close to reverence. "He didn't attack," he said, voice thick. He remembered. In that moment, everyone understood. This was not a routine police operation gone strange. It was a living reunion across generations, a testament to memory carried in blood and instinct. The so-called suspect was no threat at all. He was the very reason the K-9's extraordinary lineage existed. The park stayed utterly still, as if the air itself needed time to absorb what had just unfolded. Moments earlier, strangers had whispered about danger, imagining hidden weapons or explosives. Now they stood rooted in silence, hearts shifting from fear to awe. The transformation was almost visible. A collective breath released all at once. The lead officer lowered his hand from the ready position at his belt. The tension in his shoulders eased as understanding settled over him. Around him, other officers followed suit, radios lowering, stances softening. The language of enforcement melted into something closer to reverence. No one barked orders anymore. There was nothing to contain. Parents who had clutched their children loosened their grips. Some crouched down to whisper explanations in small, curious ears, their own eyes still shining with wonder. Teenagers who had been recording lowered their phones, realizing they were capturing history of a different kind, a story about memory and loyalty, not violence. Near the center, Duke sat proudly beside Thomas, tail brushing the grass in slow, contented sweeps. The old man rested a weathered hand on the shepherd's head, the two of them framed by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of earth and water. Their stillness seemed to radiate an invisible warmth that drew people closer without words. A woman in a sun hat dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "This isn't just coincidence," she murmured. A man beside her nodded, voice thick. "It's like they were meant to find each other." The fear that had gripped the park only minutes ago was gone, replaced by something deeper and quieter. Respect. Wonder. A shared certainty that they had witnessed a bond beyond training or chance. A reunion written long before this morning ever began. Thomas sank slowly to one knee, the movement deliberate, as if honoring a ceremony only he and the dog understood. Duke responded instantly, leaning in until his broad chest pressed firmly against the old man's heart. Their silhouettes merged in the soft light, a single figure of man and dog reunited across time. "You carry him," Thomas whispered, voice trembling but sure. "Shadow lives in you." He traced the dog's ears with calloused fingers, each stroke gentle yet filled with memories of distant battlefields and nights spent beside a faithful companion. The shepherd's eyes softened, lids half closed in quiet acceptance. Around them, the crowd held still, reverent. Phones that once filmed a possible crime now captured something else entirely. Devotion written in flesh and instinct. A small child stepped closer, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, he's hugging the dog," she whispered wide-eyed. The mother nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Yeah, sweetheart. He is." Duke shifted slightly and rested his head against Thomas's shoulder. A deep, contented sigh rumbled from his chest, vibrating like a quiet purr. The old man smiled through misted eyes. "Good boy," he murmured, voice breaking with gratitude. "You found me just like Shadow always did." The lead handler finally approached, removing his cap in silent respect. "Sir," he said softly, I think Duke recognized more than scent. Some part of history pulled him here." Thomas met his gaze, eyes shining. "Dogs remember in ways we'll never fully grasp," he replied. "What matters is the love that carries through." People around them began to clap gently, the sound spreading until it became a warm, rolling applause. It wasn't loud or celebratory. It was an acknowledgement, a salute to something pure and enduring. Thomas gave Duke one last affectionate rub along his strong neck. "Thank you, boy," he whispered, a private message meant for generations of loyal hearts. "For remembering, for coming home." Duke's tail swept the grass in slow, steady strokes, the only answer needed. In that tender stillness, the years between a wartime promise and this peaceful park morning dissolved. Man and dog, past and present, stood as living proof that love and loyalty can outlast war, distance, even lifetimes. When the first clap faded into silence, the officers stepped forward, their faces softened with humility. The lead handler extended a hand to Thomas, his voice steady but respectful. "Sir, on behalf of our unit, I apologize for the fright. We didn't know who you were, or what Duke was sensing." Thomas rose slowly, brushing grass from his knee. He accepted the handshake with a faint, understanding smile. "You followed procedure," he said. "That's your duty. And your dog, well, he followed something higher." His gaze shifted to Duke, who sat proudly at his side, tail making slow, steady sweeps along the ground. Other officers added quiet words of admiration. One spoke softly about the rare legacy of war dogs and the handlers who shaped them. Another admitted she'd only read about such connections in training manuals. "I never believed it could truly pass through generations," she said, eyes wide with awe. Around them the crowd lingered, no longer anxious but reflective. Parents explained to their children that courage and loyalty sometimes live longer than any single lifetime. Teenagers replayed their recordings not for spectacle, but to preserve the moment of recognition they'd just witnessed. News of the encounter spread quickly. Local reporters who arrived expecting a dramatic arrest instead found themselves chronicling a story of heritage and heart. Cameras that once sought tension now captured quiet smiles and gentle gestures between Thomas and Duke. As the park gradually returned to its normal rhythm, joggers resuming their runs, children chasing birds, and unspoken reverence remained. The morning's chaos had dissolved into something softer, respect for a man who had once risked everything, and for a dog whose instincts bridged decades to honor that service. Before leaving, Thomas looked down at Duke with a grateful nod. "Today reminded me," he said quietly, "that promises made in war can echo in peace." The words carried across the park like a benediction, leaving everyone with a deeper sense of what loyalty truly means. As the sun climbed higher, the park slowly returned to its gentle rhythm. Children's laughter floated back into the air, birds returned to the pond, and joggers resumed their easy pace. Yet an invisible thread of reverence lingered, binding everyone who had witnessed the extraordinary reunion. Thomas remained for a quiet moment longer, one hand resting on Duke's sturdy back. The old soldier's eyes reflected a mix of gratitude and wonder. "You came for me," he whispered, voice trembling but sure. "Across time you still came." Duke answered with a soft whine and a slow wag of his tail, a simple but profound reply. The lead officer stepped forward once more, his tone gentle. "Sir, today reminded us all why we serve, not just to enforce laws but to honor bonds that protect life itself." Thomas nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small, knowing smile. "And to remember that love," he added quietly, "is stronger than orders or years." Around them, bystanders exchanged glances filled with quiet awe. They hadn't just witnessed a dramatic police incident. They had witnessed proof that devotion and memory can outlast war, decades and even generations of living beings. Phones lowered, not to chase the next clip but to hold on to the moment. As Thomas finally turned to leave, Duke walked faithfully beside him, their silhouettes framed by the soft shimmer of the late morning sun. The crowd parted in respectful silence, many dabbing at their eyes. A mother whispered to her child, "Remember this. Loyalty like that is forever." The story of that morning would ripple far beyond the park, retold as a reminder that the bonds we forge, with animals and with each other, are stronger than time itself. And sometimes they find their way home when we least expect it.